The slave markets of Keltor Prime reeked of desperation and despair. Captain Marcus Kane walked through the crowded bazaar with purposeful strides, his weathered face betraying nothing of the disgust churning in his stomach. He'd been running cargo between the Outer Rim colonies for 15 years. But this was his first time purchasing human property. A necessity born of desperation rather than choice. His ship, the Wanderer, had been impounded by the Galactic Trade Commission for carrying contraband medical supplies to a quarantined world. The fine had cleaned out his savings, and now he needed crew he could afford. In the lawless sectors beyond civilized space, enslaved humans were cheaper than hired hands. The auction block stood at the center of the market, surrounded by a mix of alien species, some as buyers, others as merchandise. Marcus forced himself to focus on practical considerations as the auctioneer, a reptilian Kethran with golden scales, presented the next lot. Lot 47, the creature hissed through its translator collar. Human female, age 24 standard years. Technical, specialist with advanced engineering certification. Previous owner reports exceptional maintenance skills with both human and alien technology. Marcus looked up at the platform where a young woman stood with her chin raised defiantly. Her auburn hair was cropped short, practical but somehow elegant. Despite the restraint collar around her neck and the simple gray coveralls she wore, she carried herself with an unmistakable dignity that made his chest tighten. Her name, according to the documentation, was Elena Vasquez. She'd been born on one of the agricultural worlds in the Centauri system before raiders swept through her colony. The past 6 years had seen her ownership transferred 3 times, each sale reducing her from a person to a piece of specialized equipment. Bidding starts at 2,000 credits, the auctioneer announced. Marcus raised his hand, joining the handful of other bidders. He told himself he was being practical. He needed someone who could keep his aging ship running. And her technical qualifications were impressive. But as the bidding progressed, and he found himself matching increasingly aggressive offers from a hulking Vorthan trader, he knew his motivations ran deeper. The Vorthan's reputation preceded him. Grix the Brutal had earned his nickname through his treatment of his property, and the scars on his massive hands told stories Marcus preferred not to imagine. When Grix bid 8,000 credits, more than Marcus had planned to spend, reason should have prevailed. Instead, Marcus thought of the way Elena held herself, the spark of intelligence in her dark eyes that no amount of captivity had managed to extinguish. 10,000, he called out, his voice carrying across the market. Grix turned to study him with predatory interest, but when he saw the human captain's expression, something made him reconsider. Perhaps it was the way Marcus's hands rested, casually near his sidearm. Or maybe it was the reputation humans had earned for stubborn violence when protecting what they considered theirs. Sold, the auctioneer declared. Lot 47 goes to the human captain for 10,000 credits. As the transaction completed and the restraint collar was transferred to Marcus's control, Elena was led down from the platform. She walked with measured steps, her expression carefully neutral as she approached her new owner. Captain Kane, she said simply, her voice steady despite everything she'd endured. Marcus nodded, studying her face. Elena, that's your name, right? Not some designation number? Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, that he'd bothered to learn it. Yes, sir. Elena Vasquez. Good. Let's get out of here. As they left the market together, Marcus wondered if he'd just made the best decision of his life, or the most foolish. Time would tell. The Wanderer wasn't much to look at, a modified transport vessel with more scars than paint, held together by determination and creative engineering. Elena followed Marcus through the cramped corridors, noting the jury-rigged repairs and innovative modifications that kept the old ship running. Engineering sections this way, Marcus said, leading her to a surprisingly well-equipped workspace. Previous owner was a Terran mechanic who knew his business. Ship's got some quirks, but she's reliable. Elena ran her fingers along the diagnostic panels, her training automatically cataloging the systems. She's been well maintained, she observed. The power coupling modifications are elegant work. That'd be Jack's handiwork. Good man. Marcus paused. He died 6 months ago. Heart attack. Been trying to keep her running myself since then, but I'm a pilot, not an engineer. The admission hung between them, an acknowledgement of need that went beyond simple ownership. Elena studied her new captain's face, searching for clues about what kind of man he was. In 6 years of bondage, she'd learned to read her owners quickly. Survival depended on understanding their expectations, their triggers, their weaknesses. Marcus seemed different. He hadn't demanded she strip for inspection, hadn't discussed breeding potential with the seller, hadn't even tested the restraint collar's shock function. Instead, he'd given her space to examine her workplace and spoken to her as if her opinions mattered. "Your quarters are next to engineering," he continued, activating a door panel. "It's not much, but it's private." The small cabin contained a bed, storage compartments, and, surprisingly, a small desk with a computer terminal. Elena had expected a cage or bare cell. This looked like crew quarters. "The collar," she said carefully, touching the metal band around her neck. "When do you activate it?" Marcus turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I don't. That thing comes off as soon as we're out of Catherine's space. Can't have my engineer getting electrocuted while working on sensitive systems." Elena's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "Sir?" "You heard me right. The collar's just for show while we're in ports that require it. Rest of the time you work because you're good at your job, not because I'm threatening to fry your nervous system." "I don't understand," Elena said quietly. "The contract says I own you. I know what it says." Marcus leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "But ownership's a funny thing in space. Out here, what matters is whether people pull their weight and watch each other's backs. Everything else is just paperwork." For the first time in years, Elena felt something dangerous stirring in her chest. Hope. She pushed it down ruthlessly. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. "What are your expectations?" she asked instead. "My duties? Keep the ship running. Help with repairs and modifications. Might need you to handle cargo operations sometimes." Marcus paused. "And Elena? You eat at the table with the rest of the crew, not on the floor. This isn't that kind of ship." The dangerous feeling grew stronger. Elena nodded carefully. "Understood, Captain." "Good. We'll be departing in 6 hours. I'll need a full systems diagnostic before we break orbit." Marcus started to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. The lock on your door opens from the inside. Use it if you want privacy." After he left, Elena stood alone in her quarters, staring at the door lock he'd mentioned. In 6 years, she'd never had a door she could control. The simple mechanism represented something she'd almost forgotten existed: the possibility of choice. She sealed the door and sat on the bed, allowing herself exactly 60 seconds to process what had happened. Then she stood, straightened her shoulders, and went to work. Whatever Marcus Kane's motivations were, she would prove herself invaluable. Survival meant being too useful to discard. But as she began her diagnostic of the ship's systems, Elena couldn't shake the memory of how he'd said her name. Not as a designation, but as if it belonged to a person who mattered. Perhaps this time would be different. Perhaps. 3 weeks into their journey toward the Kessler system, Elena discovered that Marcus Kane was either the most elaborate liar she'd ever encountered, or genuinely unlike any owner she'd known. The restraint collar had indeed come off the moment they'd cleared Catherine's space, and he'd handed her the deactivation key with casual indifference. "Keep it," he'd said. "If someone asks to see your papers in port, you know how to put it back on." Now, as she worked in the engineering section, Elena wore simple crew coveralls with the ship's insignia, the same uniform Marcus and the other crew member, Tom, wore. The transformation from property to person felt surreal, like wearing someone else's skin. The ship's intercom crackled to life. "Elena, could you come to the bridge? We've got a situation." Marcus's voice carried tension she hadn't heard before. She found him studying the long-range sensors with Tom, the ship's navigator. Grizzled veteran who'd accepted her presence without question or comment. On the screen, 3 blips were closing on their position. "Pirates," Tom said grimly. "Skorax raiders by their configuration. They're demanding we prepare to be boarded." Elena's blood chilled. Skorax were notorious for their treatment of captives, especially human females. If they took the ship, her future would make her previous bondage look pleasant by comparison. "Options?" Marcus asked, his voice calm despite the situation. "We can't outgun them," Tom replied. Ships too old to outrun them either. Maybe we could try hiding in the asteroid field, but they'd likely find us. There is another option, Elena said quietly. Both men turned to her with surprise. In 3 weeks, she'd spoken only when directly addressed, maintaining the ingrained habits of survival. The weapon systems are offline for maintenance, she continued. But the mining charges we're carrying for the Kessler colony, I could modify them, create a debris field that might damage their engines if they get too close. Marcus studied her face. That's risky. If something goes wrong, I won't let it go wrong, Elena said with quiet conviction. But I need access to the cargo bay, and 15 minutes. Do it, Marcus decided. Tom, transmit a surrender message. Tell them we're preparing to be boarded. Buy us time. Elena ran toward the cargo bay, her mind racing through calculations. The mining charges were powerful but crude, designed for breaking apart asteroids, not precision work. She'd need to modify their detonation sequence, time the explosions to create a chain reaction that would look accidental but deal maximum damage to pursuing ships. As she worked, rewiring detonators and programming delay sequences, Elena realized something had shifted inside her. For the first time in years, she wasn't just following orders or trying to survive until tomorrow. She was fighting for something. For this ship. For Marcus, who'd treated her like a person. For the fragile possibility of a life that wasn't defined by ownership. Elena, Marcus's voice came through her comm unit. They're launching boarding. Craft. Whatever you're doing, do it now. Ready, she replied, her hands steady as she armed the charges. Take us into the asteroid field. When I give the signal, cut engines and drift. The Wanderer dove toward the swirling field of space debris, the Skorak ships following eagerly. Elena watched the tactical display, timing her moment perfectly. Now, she called. The ship went dark and silent, drifting like derelict among the asteroids. The Skoraks, anticipating easy prey, closed in rapidly. Too rapidly to detect the modified. Mining charges Elena had seeded throughout the field. The first explosion lit up space like a newborn star. The chain reaction that followed turned a section of the asteroid field into a storm of superheated rock and metal. 2 of the Skorak ships, caught in the devastation, simply vanished. The third, badly damaged, limped away without pursuit. In the aftermath, as they cleared the debris field and resumed their course, Marcus found Elena in engineering, her hands shaking from delayed reaction. You saved us, he said simply. I saved myself too, Elena replied. And the ship. I couldn't let them take her. Marcus nodded slowly. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Are you staying because you have to, or because you want to? The question hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond the legal documents that technically bound her to his service. I don't know, she said finally. I haven't had a choice in so long. I'm not sure I remember what wanting feels like. Then we'll figure it out together, Marcus said. But Elena, what you did today, that wasn't the action of property. That was the choice of someone who belongs here. For the first time since her capture, Elena allowed herself to believe that belonging might be possible. The space station Meridian Point orbited a dying red giant, its massive structure a testament to humanity's stubborn refusal to accept limitations. As the Wanderer approached the docking bay, Elena studied the station's specifications with professional interest, while wrestling with personal uncertainty. Marcus had insisted she come ashore with him instead of remaining on the ship, not as property to be guarded, but as crew with shore leave privileges. The distinction should have felt liberating. Instead, it terrified her. First time off a ship in how long? Marcus asked as they walked through the station's main concourse. 4 years, Elena admitted. My last owner preferred to keep his assets secure during port calls. The word assets hung awkwardly between them. Despite weeks of gradual change, the vocabulary of bondage still shaped how Elena described herself. Old habits ran deeper than legal documents. Meridian Point bustled with activity. Traders hawking exotic goods, spacers sharing stories over drinks, families reuniting after long separations. Elena found herself overwhelmed by the simple chaos of people living freely, making choices about where to go and what to do. Elena. Marcus's voice was gentle. You're allowed to look around. Hell, you're allowed to walk away entirely if that's what you want. The casual statement stopped her cold. What? You heard me. We're in neutral space. No slavery, no bonded service. If you wanted to disappear into this crowd, I couldn't stop you legally. Wouldn't stop you personally either. Elena stared at him, searching for the trap. There was always a trap. I don't understand. The contract is void here. Local law doesn't recognize human bondage. Marcus met her eyes steadily. Which means every day you stay on my ship from now on is your choice, not mine. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Freedom, real freedom, was 3 steps away. She could lose herself in the crowd, start over, build a life that belonged entirely to her. The possibility should have been intoxicating. Instead, she felt lost. I don't know how, she said quietly. I don't know how to be free. Marcus nodded, as if he'd expected this response. Freedom's not a switch you flip. It's something you learn, like any other skill. They found a quiet cafe overlooking the station's central plaza. As they sat across from each other, Elena noticed how Marcus positioned himself. Close enough to offer security, far enough to avoid crowding her. Everything about his body language suggested protection without possession. Tell me about before, he said. Before the raiders came. Elena hesitated. She'd learned not to think about her life before captivity. The pain was too sharp, the contrast too cruel. But something in Marcus's expression encouraged honesty. I was an engineer on a terraforming project, she said slowly. We were converting an atmosphere, making a world livable for human families. I had plans, a career track, maybe eventually my own project to oversee. The words came easier as she continued. I wanted to build things that mattered. Places where people could make homes. You still could, Marcus said simply. I'm property, Marcus. Legal property in most of the galaxy. Not here, and not on my ship. He leaned forward slightly. Elena, I need you to understand something. The woman who saved us from those pirates, the one who keeps my ship running, better than it has in months, she's not property. She's exactly the kind of person who should be building worlds. Elena felt tears threatening, another luxury she'd taught herself to suppress. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. I want you to remember what it feels like to choose. To wake up in the morning and decide what kind of day you're going to have. I want you to argue with me when you think, I'm wrong, and to take pride in your work because it's yours, not because you're ordered to do it. And if I can't, if I'm too broken for that, then we'll work on it together, for as long as it takes. Marcus's voice carried absolute conviction. But, Elena, you're not broken. Bent, maybe. Scared, definitely. But not broken. As they sat in comfortable silence, Elena watched the people around them. Families laughing, couples arguing good-naturedly, children running between tables. Normal human interactions she'd almost forgotten existed. I think I'd like to try, she said finally. Learning to be free, I mean. Marcus smiled, the first truly warm expression she'd seen from him. Good. But Elena, you don't have to learn alone. That's what crew means. We watch out for each other. For the first time since her capture, Elena allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival. It was a fragile thing, this hope, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. 6 months had passed since Meridian Point, and Elena was discovering that freedom was messier than she'd imagined. Learning to make choices after years of having every decision made for her proved to be an exhausting process, filled with small victories and frustrating setbacks. The Wanderer had become something she'd never experienced before. A home. Not the place where she was kept, but the place where she belonged. The distinction mattered more than she'd expected. Elena, you're doing it again, Marcus said from the engine room doorway. She looked up from the power couplings she'd been obsessively recalibrating. Doing what? Working 16-hour shifts because you think productivity equals worth. He stepped into the room, his expression concerned rather than critical. When's the last time you took a day off? Actually off, not just working on personal projects. Elena set down her tools reluctantly. Over the months, Marcus had become adept at reading her patterns, how she retreated into work when anxiety spiked, how she still struggled to believe her value wasn't measured purely in usefulness. The ship needs her chief engineer to be rested and thinking clearly, Marcus interrupted gently. We're docking at Harmony Station tomorrow. I want you to take shore leave, real shore leave. The suggestion triggered familiar panic. Despite months of growing trust, Elena still struggled with unstructured time, with the absence of clear directives. I could upgrade the navigation computer instead, she offered. Elena. Marcus's voice carried quiet authority. This isn't a request. The words hung between them, loaded with historical weight. For a moment, Elena felt the familiar response rising. Compliance, submission, the ingrained patterns of survival. Then she realized something had changed. No, she said quietly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. No? You said I get to choose. You can't order me to take time off and call it freedom. Elena stood straighter, surprised by her own boldness. If I want to work, that's my choice too. Instead of anger, Marcus's face broke into a grin. There she is. What? The woman who told off 3 Skorax raiders with improvised explosives. The one who argues with Tom about navigation routes because she thinks she knows better. Marcus leaned against the workbench. Elena, you just told your captain no. Do you realize what that means? Elena considered this. 6 months ago, the idea of contradicting any authority figure would have been unthinkable. Now she'd done it instinctively, defending her right to make her own choices. It means I'm not afraid of you anymore, she said, the realization dawning as she spoke. Exactly. And since you're not afraid of me, you might trust me when I say that taking time for yourself isn't a luxury. It's necessary. People need more than work to stay whole. The conversation was interrupted by Tom's voice over the intercom. Marcus, Elena, you need to see this. We've got company. They found Tom at the sensor station, his expression grim. 3 ships were approaching. Sleek, expensive vessels with the kind of military modifications that suggested serious trouble. Bounty hunters, Tom said. High-end ones. They're requesting permission to board. Elena's blood ran cold. She'd always known this day might come. Someone from her past, a former owner perhaps, or creditors claiming her as collateral, had finally tracked her down. Elena. Marcus's voice was steady. Are you still legally bonded to someone? Outstanding contracts or claims? I don't know, she admitted. The paperwork was always handled above my clearance level. There could be liens, transfer disputes, anything. Marcus moved to the weapons console. Tom, prep for emergency departure. Elena, get the engines ready for maximum burn. Wait. Elena's voice stopped them both. They haven't done anything yet, and running will only make us look guilty. Elena, if they take you, then I'll fight, but I won't run anymore. She turned to face Marcus fully. These past months, you've been teaching me that I'm worth something beyond my usefulness. If that's true, then I'm worth fighting for. But more than that, I'm worth fighting for myself. Marcus studied her face, seeing the resolution there. After a moment, he nodded. Tom, open a channel. Let's see what they want. The lead bounty hunter appeared on screen, a professional-looking woman with cybernetic enhancements and cold eyes. Captain Kane, we're here for the bonded individual Elena Vasquez. We have legal documentation for her recovery. Let's see it, Marcus replied evenly. As the legal documents scrolled across their screen, Elena read through them with growing understanding. The claim wasn't from a former owner. It was from her home colony's creditors, seeking to recover assets stolen during the raid that had destroyed her world. According to this, you're technically stolen property, the bounty hunter said. The insurance company that paid out the colony's losses now holds clear title. Elena felt the familiar weight of despair settling over her. But this time, something else rose to meet it. Anger. Pure, clean anger at a system that could reduce human beings to asset recovery. Counter offer, Marcus said suddenly. Name your price. I'll buy her contract from the insurance company. Marcus. No. Elena said quickly. I won't let you bankrupt yourself for me. He turned to her with an expression she'd never seen before. Fierce, protective, and something deeper that made her heart race. Elena, you said people are worth fighting for. You're worth everything I have and more. His voice carried absolute conviction. Besides, someone needs to keep this ship running, and Tom's hopeless with anything more complex than basic navigation. For the first time in her adult life, Elena felt truly chosen. Not acquired, not assigned, but chosen by someone who saw her value beyond her utility. The price is 200,000 credits, the bounty hunter said. Non-negotiable. Marcus didn't hesitate. Done. I'll transfer the funds within the hour. As the transaction completed and the bounty hunters departed with their payment, Elena stood in the sudden quiet of the bridge, processing what had happened. Marcus, she said finally, that was your entire savings, your retirement fund. Money's just money, Elena. But finding someone who makes you want to stay in one place instead of always running toward the next port, that's worth any price. Elena looked at this man who'd given her freedom, taught her to value herself, and now literally bought her future not to own her, but to ensure no one else could. The emotion rising in her chest was new and terrifying and wonderful. I love you, she said, the words coming out in a rush before she could stop them. Marcus stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her face. I love you too. Have for months, but I needed you to choose it for yourself. When he kissed her, Elena finally understood what it meant to be completely free. Free to choose her own life, her own love, her own future. And she chose this man, this ship, this life they were building together among the stars. 1 year after the bounty hunter incident, Elena stood in the observation deck of the Wanderer, watching construction crews work on their latest project. The modified cargo bay had been converted into something unprecedented in her experience. A mobile engineering workshop capable of providing technical support to colonies throughout the Outer Rim. Penny for your thoughts, Marcus said, joining her at the viewport. Elena smiled, still getting used to the luxury of sharing her inner world with someone who genuinely wanted to hear it. I was thinking about purpose. For so long, my existence was defined by what other people needed from me. Now, I get to decide what I want to contribute. The transformation of the Wanderer had been Elena's idea, born from the recognition that isolated colonies struggled with technical problems they couldn't solve locally. Instead of hauling cargo between established worlds, they now traveled to places that needed their expertise, helping communities build and maintain the infrastructure that made life possible on hostile worlds. The Ceres colony sent another request, Marcus said, holding up a datapad. Their atmospheric processors are failing, and they can't afford to hire a corporate team. How long until we can reach them? Elena asked, already mentally cataloging the equipment they'd need. 3 weeks if we push the engines. But Elena... Marcus hesitated. There's something else. The message included an offer. They want to hire you permanently. Full citizenship, your own engineering firm, significant financial backing. Elena turned to study his face. Over the past year, they'd received several such offers. Colonies and corporations recognizing her skills and wanting to secure her services exclusively. Each time, Marcus had presented the opportunities without pressure or expectation, making it clear the choice was entirely hers. And what do you think I should do? She asked. I think you should do whatever makes you happy, Marcus replied. Even if that means leaving the ship, leaving me. The casual way he said it didn't fool Elena. She'd learned to read the subtle signs of his emotions, the slight tension in his shoulders, the careful neutrality of his expression when he was protecting himself from potential pain. Marcus Kane, she said, moving closer to him. Are you trying to get rid of me? No. God, no. The words came out with more force than he'd intended. But Elena, when I first met you, you told me you wanted to build worlds. This could be your chance to do exactly that. Elena considered this. The Ceres offer was generous, and the work would be meaningful. She could establish herself as an independent professional, build the kind of career she'd dreamed of before her world fell apart. It was everything she'd once thought she wanted. There's just one problem, she said finally. What's that? I already am building something. Right here, with you. Elena gestured toward the modified workshop. This ship, what we do together, we're not just fixing machines, Marcus. We're giving people hope. Showing them that someone cares enough to help. To come when they call for assistance. Marcus's expression softened. You're sure? Because Elena, I need you to know. I won't try to hold you if you want to go. I can't be another person who limits your choices. Elena reached for his hands, marveling again at how different it felt, to touch someone by choice rather than command. The choice I'm making is to stay with you. Not because I'm afraid to leave, not because I don't have other options, but because this, us, the work we do, the life we're building, this is what I choose. The intercom crackled with Tom's voice. Marcus, Elena, we've got an incoming transmission from the Kepler mining station. Sounds urgent. They found Tom at the communications station, his face grim. The message was from the station administrator, and the desperation in her voice was unmistakable. Our life support systems are failing, the woman said. We've lost primary power, and the backup generators won't hold much longer. We have 300 people here, including 40 children. Please, if there's anyone who can help. Elena was already moving toward the engineering section before the message finished. Tom, set course for Kepler Station, maximum speed. Marcus, I need you to contact every ship in the sector. Medical vessels, cargo haulers, anyone who can assist with evacuation, if we can't fix their systems. On it, Marcus replied, but he paused to watch Elena as she began pulling equipment from storage. Her movements were confident, purposeful, the actions of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done and why it mattered. Elena, he called, after her. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. She turned back with a smile that lit up her entire face. I know I did. Now come on, Captain. We have people to save. As the Wanderer jumped to faster-than-light speed, racing toward Kepler Station, Elena felt the deep satisfaction of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Not because someone owned her services, not because she had no other options, but because she had chosen this life, this man, this purpose. She was no longer property. She was no longer even just free. She was home. 5 years after that first day on Keltor Prime, Elena stood before the assembled delegates of the Outer Rim Colonial Alliance, delivering what would become known as the Meridian Address. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was speaking from the same station where Marcus had first told her she could walk away if she chose. Honored delegates, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. We gather today not just to discuss policy, but to affirm a fundamental principle, that every human being possesses inherent worth that cannot be bought, sold, or owned. In the front row, Marcus watched with quiet pride as the woman he loved addressed the most powerful political body in human space. The Outer Rim Colonial Alliance had been formed 3 years earlier, largely in response to the humanitarian crisis revealed by Elena's work. Her reports from isolated colonies had exposed the ongoing practice of bonded labor throughout the frontier territories, galvanizing support for reform. The legislation before you today, Elena continued, represents more than legal changes. It represents our choice as a species to recognize that freedom isn't a privilege to be granted, but a right to be protected. The anti-bondage accords had been Elena's initiative, crafted over months of careful negotiation with colonial governments, corporate interests, and human rights organizations. The legislation would outlaw all forms of human bondage throughout Alliance space and establish enforcement mechanisms to ensure compliance. As Elena spoke about rehabilitation programs for former bondservants and economic incentives for colonies that embraced free labor, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The Wanderer had become something of a legend throughout the Outer Rim, the ship that appeared wherever help was needed, staffed by people who cared more about results than profit. Their crew had grown over the years. Tom still handled navigation, but they'd added Dr. Sarah Kim, a medic who specialized in treating former bondservants, James Wright, a young engineer who'd been inspired by Elena's example, and Maria Santos, a former corporate lawyer who joined their mission after witnessing the conditions on a mining colony. Together, they'd helped establish free colonies on 17 worlds, provided technical assistance to hundreds of communities, and rescued more than 3,000 people from various forms of bondage. But more than that, they'd proven that another way was possible. That humans could build societies based on cooperation rather than exploitation. The question before us, Elena said, her voice rising with passion, is not whether we can afford to eliminate bondage, but whether we can afford not to. Every person reduced to property represents a loss of potential, a waste of human creativity and dignity that diminishes us all. The vote, when it came, was overwhelming. The anti-bondage accords passed by a margin of 4-1, with implementation to begin immediately. As the delegates erupted in applause, Elena felt a hand slip into hers. Marcus had joined her on the stage, his presence a reminder of how far they'd both traveled. Later, in their quarters aboard the Wanderer, Elena sat at her desk working on her next project, a comprehensive guide for establishing free colonies that would be distributed throughout human space. Marcus watched her work, marveling as always at her tireless dedication to helping others find the freedom she'd fought so hard to claim. "Elena," he said quietly, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't bid on you that day?" She looked up from her writing, considering the question seriously. "I think someone else would have bought me. Maybe someone worse than my previous owners. Maybe someone better. But Marcus, that's not the right question. What is? The right question is what happened, because you chose to see me as a person worth saving, and more importantly, what happened because I chose to believe you." Elena set down her stylus and turned to face him fully. "Every person we've helped, every colony that's embraced free labor, every former bondservant who's learned to make their own choices, it all traces back to that moment when you decided ownership wasn't the same thing as caring." Marcus moved to sit beside her, pulling her close. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because I chose you from an auction block, not because I own legal documents with your name on them, but because every day you choose to be the kind of person who makes the galaxy better." Elena kissed him softly, thinking about choice and love and the infinite possibilities that opened when people were free to write their own stories. Outside their window, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and somewhere among them, other stories were beginning. Stories of freedom found, dignity restored, and love chosen rather than commanded. "What's our next destination?" she asked. Marcus consulted the navigation computer. "New Sydney Colony. They're having problems with their water reclamation systems, and they've specifically requested our help." Elena smiled and returned to her writing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help, new choices to make. But tonight, she was exactly where she wanted to be, working beside the man she loved, building a future where everyone would have the right to choose their own destiny. The Wanderer hummed quietly around them, carrying them toward their next mission among the stars. In the engineering section, systems ran smoothly under Elena's expert care. On the bridge, navigation charts plotted courses to worlds that needed their help. Throughout the ship, the tools and equipment that would transform lives waited ready for deployment. But the most important transformation had already occurred. The moment when property became person, when ownership became love, and when two hearts chose each other freely among the infinite possibilities of space. Marcus watched Elena work for a few more minutes, then quietly returned to his own duties. They had a colony to save after all, and the universe was vast enough to hold all the dreams they dared to chase together. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the legal documents that had once defined Elena's existence, but the choices that defined her future. She had been his property once, but now she was something infinitely more valuable. She was home, and hope, and the promise that freedom could grow in the darkest places if tended by caring hands. The stars waited, and they flew toward them together, free at last to write their own story among the endless night.